the night Ukraine just crushed Russia by destroying its Invincible Kinzhal Hypersonic missile battery. A weapon Vladimir Putin personally hailed as unstoppable and without any defense has been completely obliterated on the ground before it could launch even a single missile. This was not a simple strike. Ukrainian forces tracked and destroyed an entire Kinzhal battery, including its MiG, 3 1K carrier aircraft, and multiple armed hypersonic missiles deep inside occupied territory. In the next 25 minutes, you will discover exactly how Ukraine achieved this remarkable feat, what it reveals about the collapse of Russia's hypersonic program and air defense network, and why the geopolitical consequences of this single night extend far beyond the battlefield into the war rooms of Beijing, Europe, and Washington. Here's what you are about to understand in the next 25 minutes. This is not simply the story of Ukraine destroying another Russian missile system. It is the story of how a country that Russia planned to conquer in days has now repeatedly dismantled Moscow's hypersonic weapons once called Invincible. In this video, you will get the full technical breakdown of the Kinzhal hypersonic missile, the remarkable intelligence and operational details behind this strike, the essential historical and strategic context of the Kinzhal program, and the significant geopolitical consequences that extend well beyond Ukraine. You will also see 4 clear scenarios for where this war goes from here. This is not another headline video. We provide the deep, honest, and structured analysis that mainstream media is simply not structured to deliver. If you want consistent, honest, and deeply researched analysis like this every week, hit the subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Your support allows us to keep bringing you the full strategic picture that no other channel is providing. Let's start with what actually happened, because the details matter enormously. On the night of April 10, 2026, Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, GUR, carried out one of the most precise and strategically important operations of the year. Ukrainian special drone units tracked and successfully struck a Russian Kinzhal hypersonic missile battery that was actively preparing for launch in occupied Crimea. According to GUR's official statement, the target was a mobile Kinzhal battery consisting of at least 1 MiG, 3 1K fighter jets specially configured to carry the Kh-47M2 Kinzhal hypersonic missile, accompanied by its ground support vehicles, missile transport loaders, and armed warheads. The convoy was moving under darkness toward a forward launch position when the strike occurred. The results were devastating for Russia. Ukrainian forces completely destroyed 1 MiG, 3 1K aircraft, along with 4 fully armed Kinzhal hypersonic missiles that were loaded and ready for immediate launch. 2 additional support vehicles were heavily damaged or destroyed. The operation also killed or wounded at least 11 Russian servicemen, including technical personnel responsible for arming and preparing the missiles. What makes this strike especially significant is timing. Ukrainian intelligence had determined that this specific Kinzhal battery was scheduled to participate in a major combined missile and drone attack on Ukrainian cities that very same night. By destroying the battery before it could reach its firing position, Ukraine didn't just eliminate expensive hardware, they prevented a potentially massive wave of hypersonic strikes against civilian infrastructure. Hours after the operation, the GUR released high-quality drone footage showing the precise moment of the strike, including large secondary explosions caused by the detonation of the Kinzhal missiles on the ground. The footage quickly spread across international channels and has been partially verified by independent OSINT analysts using satellite imagery. This was no lucky hit. This was the result of real-time intelligence tracking, persistent surveillance, and surgical execution against one of Russia's most prized and heavily protected weapons systems. To truly understand why this strike was so devastating, we need to look at the weapon itself, the Kinzhal hypersonic missile, the very system Russia has repeatedly called invincible. The Kh-47M2 Kinzhal is an aeroballistic hypersonic missile that Russia first unveiled in 2018. Launched exclusively from specially modified MiG, 3 1K interceptor jets, it reaches speeds of up to Mach 10, that is roughly 12,350 kilometers per hour, or more than 10 times the speed of sound. At that velocity, it can cover 2,000 kilometers in under 10 minutes. Unlike traditional cruise missiles that fly low and slow, The Kinzhal climbs high into the atmosphere before diving down in a near vertical trajectory, maneuvering violently in its final phase to evade air defenses. Think of it as Putin's hypersonic dagger, a glowing bolt of lightning that appears on radar for only seconds before impact. The missile is so fast that most conventional air defense systems simply do not have enough reaction time to lock on, calculate an intercept, and fire. This is why Vladimir Putin personally described the Kinzhal as a weapon for which there is no defense in the world. He positioned it as the crown jewel of Russia's new strategic arsenal, capable of delivering both conventional and nuclear warheads with terrifying precision. A complete Kinzhal battery is not just one missile. It is a highly coordinated system. The MiG-31K carrier aircraft, ground-based transport and loading vehicles, specialized fueling trucks, and command and control units. Each MiG-31K can carry only one Kinzhal at a time, making the entire battery extremely expensive and logistically demanding. Russia has only a limited number of these aircraft and missiles, which makes every single one irreplaceable. In the current war, Moscow has been forced to use this once strategic weapon for tactical strikes against Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, a clear sign that Russia is burning through its most advanced arsenal faster than it can replace it. The Invincible label was not just marketing. It was the foundation of Russia's deterrence narrative. If the West pushes too hard, these hypersonic weapons would punish any adversary instantly and without warning. That narrative cracked the moment Ukrainian drones found the battery moving in darkness, loaded and ready. By destroying the MiG-31K and its armed Kinzhal missiles on the ground, Ukraine did not just eliminate hardware, they proved that even Russia's most prized hypersonic system is vulnerable at the very moment it is most dangerous before it ever leaves the ground. To truly appreciate why the destruction of this Kinzhal battery represents such a profound shock to Russia, we must place the event in its full historical and strategic context. On the 1st of March 2018, during a carefully staged address to the Federal Assembly, Vladimir Putin unveiled an entire family of what he called invincible strategic weapons designed to neutralize American missile defenses. Among them was the Kinzhal. Putin described the air-launched hypersonic missile as capable of reaching Mach 10, maneuvering violently in its final phase, and delivering both conventional and nuclear warheads with devastating precision. He declared there was no defense in the world against it. The Kinzhal was immediately positioned as the crown jewel of Russia's new deterrence doctrine, a weapon that would restore strategic parity and make any direct challenge to Moscow suicidal. The program itself had been in development since the early 2010s, but its dramatic public debut in 2018 was timed to send a powerful message to NATO. Russia claimed the missile had already entered experimental combat duty aboard specially modified MiG-31K interceptors. The combination of extreme speed, high-altitude flight profile, and terminal maneuvering was meant to render existing air defense systems obsolete. For years afterward, Russian state media and military analysts repeatedly echoed Putin's words. The Kinzhal was not merely advanced, it was untouchable. The missile made its combat debut in the opening phase of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in March 2022. Russian forces announced successful Kinzhal strikes against Ukrainian command centers and hardened bunkers. Over the following 4 years, Moscow continued to showcase the weapon as proof of technological superiority. Yet beneath the propaganda, a different reality was unfolding. As the war consumed vast quantities of precision-guided munitions and Western sanctions restricted production, Russia's stockpiles of high-end missiles began to shrink dramatically. By late 2025 and into 2026, the Russian military found itself compelled to use its once strategic Kinzhal missiles for routine tactical missions against Ukrainian cities, power plants, and frontline positions. This shift from strategic deterrent to everyday battlefield tool signaled a deeper crisis. Moscow was burning through its most expensive and limited assets simply to maintain pressure. The Kinzhal battery destroyed on April 10th was operating exactly in this mode, loaded, moving toward a launch position and preparing to join yet another mass strike. Strategically, the Kinzhal was always more than a weapon. It formed the cornerstone of Russia's regional deterrence posture, particularly over the Black Sea and occupied Crimea. By basing these air-launched hypersonic systems in what Moscow considered secure rear territory, Russia aimed to create a permanent threat envelope that would intimidate both Ukraine and NATO. The April 10th strike did not merely eliminate hardware, it pierced the carefully constructed narrative that Russia's most advanced systems were safe, even on the ground in its own controlled areas. This single operation fits into a larger, unmistakable pattern. Ukraine has systematically demonstrated that no part of Russia's occupied territory is truly beyond reach. The historical significance is unmistakable. Weapons once hailed as revolutionary can quickly become liabilities when an adversary masters the intelligence, surveillance, and precision strike capabilities required to hit them at their weakest link before they ever leave the ground. But the real story behind the April 10th strike is not just the explosion on the ground. It is the invisible architecture of intelligence that made the destruction possible in the first place. Ukrainian forces did not stumble upon this Kinzhal battery by accident. According to the official statement from Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, GUR, drone operators from its specialized unmanned systems unit had been tracking the entire Russian convoy in real time for several hours before the strike. The target was a fully operational Kinzhal battery, complete with a MiG-31K fighter jet, missile transport vehicles, fueling trucks, and armed warheads moving under cover of darkness through occupied Crimea toward a forward launch position. What makes this operation extraordinary is the level of penetration required. Ukrainian intelligence knew not only the convoy's exact route and timing, but also its mission. The battery was scheduled to join a major combined strike package against Ukrainian cities that same night. They knew the precise moment the aircraft would be armed and the exact window when the convoy would be most vulnerable during the transition from storage to launch-ready status. Persistent drone surveillance followed every movement, feeding live coordinates to strike teams without ever alerting Russian air defenses or electronic warfare units. The strike itself was surgical. Multiple Ukrainian long-range attack drones, possibly supported by precision-guided munitions, converged on the convoy at the optimal moment. The first wave neutralized the MiG-31K carrier aircraft while it was still on the ground. Secondary strikes then hit the loaded Kinzhal missiles, triggering massive secondary explosions that destroyed the support vehicles and warheads. The entire sequence was captured in high-resolution drone footage that the GUR released within hours, showing clear secondary detonations consistent with hypersonic missile fuel and warheads. This was not a one-off lucky hit. Independent OSINT analysts have cross-verified the footage with commercial satellite imagery, confirming the location and the scale of destruction. The operation demonstrates a mature, layered intelligence capability. Human sources inside Russian units, signals intelligence intercepting communications, persistent drone overwatch, and rapid strike coordination. Russia had spent years fortifying Crimea with layered air defenses and electronic jamming systems precisely to prevent exactly this kind of deep strike. Yet Ukrainian forces operated inside that defended space with impunity. The deeper implication is chilling for Moscow. Russian operational security in occupied territory, once considered airtight, has been systematically compromised. Every movement of high-value assets like Kinzhal batteries is now observable and targetable. The Invincible weapon was neutralized at its most vulnerable point, while it was still on the ground, still being prepared, and still depending on the very logistics chain that Ukraine has learned to exploit with lethal precision. This is intelligence dominance in action. But the true significance of this strike extends far beyond the smoke and flames in occupied Crimea. What happened on the night of April 10, 2026, has sent powerful ripples through military planning rooms, political capitals, and strategic calculations around the world. First, the military impact is immediate and severe. By destroying an entire Kinzhal battery, including the MiG-31K carrier aircraft and 4 fully armed hypersonic missiles, Ukraine has deprived Russia of one of its most potent precision strike tools. The Kinzhal was designed to penetrate air defenses at Mach 10 and deliver devastating blows against high-value targets. Losing it on the ground before launch means Russia now has fewer options to overwhelm Ukrainian defenses during mass attacks. Moscow is forced to rely more heavily on older cruise missiles and drones that Ukraine has grown increasingly effective at intercepting. This single operation accelerates the attrition of Russia's most advanced arsenal and creates new gaps in its strike capability. Politically, the strike delivers a devastating blow to Putin's carefully crafted narrative of technological superiority. For years, the Kinzhal was presented as living proof that Russia had leapfrogged the West in hypersonic weapons. Putin himself called it invincible and tied it directly to Russia's deterrence posture. Seeing one of these prize systems obliterated on the ground undermines the entire story Moscow has told both its own people and the international community. The Invincible label now carries a bitter irony that even Russian state media will struggle to explain away. Economically, the loss is staggering. Each Kinzhal missile costs millions of dollars to produce, while the specialized MiG-31K modifications, support vehicles, and logistics infrastructure push the total value of one battery into the tens of millions. In a war where Western sanctions have already crippled production lines and raw material supplies, every destroyed system represents an irreplaceable financial hit that Russia can ill afford. The international consequences reach even further. In Beijing, Chinese military planners are watching closely. China has poured billions into its own hypersonic arsenal, including the DF-17 and DF-27 systems, operating under the same assumption that extreme speed equals invulnerability. The lesson from this strike is more disturbing than a simple interception in flight. The entire kill chain transport, loading, and launch preparation can be observed and destroyed. This insight will force Beijing to rethink its own contingency plans for any future conflict over Taiwan. In Europe, the operation strengthens the argument for continued and even escalated support to Ukraine. NATO members now see concrete evidence that Ukrainian forces are not merely defending but actively dismantling Russia's most advanced capabilities. The case for supplying more long-range drones, enhanced intelligence sharing, and additional air defense systems has just become significantly more compelling. The timing also complicates ongoing peace negotiations. Russia launched its latest large-scale strike package shortly after recent U.S.-Ukrainian talks in Florida. Ukraine's precise counterstrike against the Kinzhal battery sends a clear battlefield message. Neither side is negotiating from a position of weakness. The dynamics of any future ceasefire discussions have grown noticeably more complex. Inside Russia, the domestic political cost continues to mount. While state television may downplay or ignore the GUR footage, ordinary Russians are increasingly aware that the war is not unfolding according to the original promises of swift victory. Every high-profile loss like this slowly chips away at the image of an invincible Russian military machine. In short, this single night in April has exposed vulnerabilities across Russia's entire strategic posture and reminded the world that in modern conflict, intelligence dominance often matters more than raw technological firepower. Now, let's look at the broader trends and what this strike tells us about the direction of the war heading into the summer of 2026. Since the Kinzhal's combat debut in 2022, Russia has lost at least 38 confirmed units according to Ukrainian Air Force data and open-source verification. That number is rising sharply. In the first 3 months of 2026 alone, Ukrainian forces have neutralized 9 Kinzhal missiles and 3 MiG-31K carriers, a pace that suggests Russia's hypersonic inventory is being depleted faster than it can be replenished under sanctions. Moscow is now forced to use these once strategic weapons for routine tactical strikes, a clear sign of desperation rather than dominance. This brings us to 4 plausible scenarios for how the Kinzhal story evolves from here. Scenario 1. Continued Ukrainian attrition, most probable near-term path. Ukraine maintains its intelligence edge and methodical campaign of hunting Kinzhal batteries in occupied Crimea and Western Russia. Over the next 6 months, Moscow loses another 15-20 launch platforms, severely limiting its ability to deliver hypersonic strikes and forcing greater reliance on cheaper but less effective weapons. Scenario 2. Russian escalation. Humiliated by the loss of prestige assets, Moscow responds with a massive surge in Iskander, cruise missile, and drone attacks aimed at overwhelming Ukrainian air defenses and civilian infrastructure ahead of the summer campaign season. Success here depends entirely on whether Western supplies of interceptors can keep pace. Scenario 3. Negotiated pause. Back-channel talks produce a temporary ceasefire framework before major summer offensives begin. Kinzhal operations are scaled back on both sides, but the underlying territorial and security disputes remain unresolved, turning the conflict into a frozen standoff similar to previous post-Soviet conflicts. Scenario 4. Crimea and border regions become liabilities. Most strategically significant, Ukraine's persistent strikes reach a tipping point where Russia can no longer safely operate high-value hypersonic systems from forward bases. Moscow is forced to withdraw remaining Kinzhal assets deeper into its territory, effectively turning occupied Crimea and border airfields from power projection platforms into costly defensive burdens. My analytical judgment is clear. The most likely outcome is a combination of scenarios 1 and 4. Ukraine will continue its systematic degradation of Russia's hypersonic fleet while gradually making forward basing untenable. The next 3 to 6 months will be defined by whether Western support matches the tempo of this attrition war or allows Russia a window to regroup. Let me close with the 5 geopolitical truths this strike has placed firmly in our hands. First, hypersonic weapons are not invincible. They are vulnerable throughout their entire kill chain, from production and transport to final launch preparation, and Ukraine has shown it can exploit that vulnerability with lethal precision. Second, intelligence dominance now matters more than any single weapons platform. The ability to track, monitor, and strike high-value targets in real time has fundamentally changed the operational calculus of this war. Third, Russia's most prized strategic assets are no longer safe even in occupied territory. The Kinzhal battery destroyed on April 10th proves that Crimea and border regions are now contested spaces. Fourth, Moscow's escalation is driven by systemic pressure and desperation, not by overwhelming strength. And fifth, the lessons of this conflict are being absorbed by every major military power on Earth. The message is clear. No weapon, no matter how advanced, is safe from an adversary with superior intelligence and the will to act. Zoom out for a moment. The era of technological invincibility as a deterrent strategy is over. The assumption that building something fast enough or complex enough makes it untouchable has been dismantled in real time on the battlefields of Ukraine. The new reality of 21st century conflict is persistent surveillance, drone dominance, and kill chains that are only as strong as their most observable link. My analytical judgment remains unchanged. Ukraine will continue its methodical attrition of Russia's hypersonic capabilities over the coming months, gradually turning Russia's forward bases into costly liabilities. The outcome will ultimately depend on whether Western support keeps pace with this evolving battlefield reality. If this video gave you a clearer, more honest picture than anything else you watched today, hit the like button right now, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next deep dive analysis. Share this with one person who needs the full strategic context, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Which of the 4 scenarios do you believe is most likely? How long do you think Russia's remaining Kinzhal systems can stay invincible? I read every single comment and I respond to the best ones. The world does not slow down, neither do we. I'll see you in the next video.